Well, Nicole is working on a graphic novel about her childhood in West Chicago, Lawndale. And this got me started about my time in Hyde Park. I came to Hyde Park in 1958 at the age of 18. And I stayed there for around about 10 years. When you're 18 and you go somewhere, you assume that what you see is just the way it is. What I saw was whole blocks that were surrounded by tall fences made of doors. And inside each block, outlined by doors, was nothing but cleared land. I didn't realize that these doors came from the apartments of people who used to live on the block behind the fence that the doors were now. And I had no idea that I was looking at a mammoth experiment in what was called urban renewal. The university was pushing its footprint outward, flattening as it went. The university community represented every ethnic group, every shade of every color that the world produced. The neighborhood around it was mostly African American and mostly poor. There were bound to be little collisions, although to some extent the two communities were invisible to each other. Hyde Park was territory disputed between the Blackstone Rangers and the Devil's Disciples. I remember once walking along 53rd Street when the Blackstone Rangers were regrouping after some set to. Guys were running past me shouting, "Stones! Stones! Stones!" I wasn't frightened. They were doing their business, I was doing mine. One morning, my friend Norm's boss blundered into a peace conclave between the Rangers and the Disciples on the Midway Plaisance. Picture to yourself, ranks of gang members, Disciples on one side, Rangers on the other, and walking along the line between them, one middle-aged white man carrying a briefcase on his way to work. Sometimes the interactions did get more personal. My friend Rob was walking down 55th Street with his girlfriend one evening. There were shops there with large front windows, rather low because the shops themselves were several steps down below street level. Rob and his girlfriend are walking along and looking in the windows when a group of people surround them and pin them against a window and demand money. On one side of the window, people are browsing and buying books, and on the other side, two people are being robbed. My friend doesn't want any trouble because his girlfriend is there, so he hands over his wallet and the group moves off, except for the girl who's holding the money, who turns back to him and says, "I hope you don't think all black people are like this. You want it back?" Rob is so stunned that he just stands there with his mouth open, and the most conflicted thief in Hyde Park turns around and runs off to join her friends. When I got married, my husband Saul and I moved to an apartment on 53rd and Kenwood. One day I had stayed home with a migraine, and I ran out of Excedrin, so I dragged myself down to the drugstore. As I came back into the vestibule of my building, a man came in behind me. He turned to look at the line of buzzers, and so I thought no more about him, until I felt his hand brush along the side of my head, reaching for my mouth. I heard a piercing scream, and then I realized it's me. My attacker ran off like Dracula from a crucifix, and I just stood there in admiration of this fire alarm sound that I had created without even thinking about it. A little bit later, after the police had gone, I realized that my head felt fine. Just like being startled is supposed to cure hiccups, a rape attempt got rid of my migraine. After a few years, no more husband. Instead, I have a roommate, Annie. She was walking down Kenwood Avenue when she was grabbed by a man who tried to pull her into the alley. He didn't show a knife or a gun. Apparently, he thought he could do it by main force. But Annie was a sturdy girl. She dug her heels in, and he couldn't move her. He pulled, and he pulled, and he pulled some more. She was immovable. Finally, he gave up and let go of her and just started walking up the street, turning back every so often to look back at her. She resumed walking in the opposite direction, turning every so often to look back at him to make sure he was still walking away from her. And that's how they went, turning to look at each other as they got farther and farther apart. Eventually, I moved to Lincoln Park, long before it was trendy, let me say, and my Hyde Park days were behind me, but I'll always have my memories.